Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Goddles and Pat Cummings. The Civil War had a greater impact on American society and policy than any other event in the country's history. It has been considered the most traumatic experience endured by all generations of Americans. Fast forward 150 years when our guest discovered a tattered cardboard box saved for him by his elderly parents. It contained diaries, photos, letters, and clippings from very distant relatives. Mentioned in the treasure trove was Hattie, the youngest child of his great-great-grandmother. What to do with this time capsule? Perhaps a historic novel? Let's discuss. Well, here we are. And by here we are, meaning I'm in Tacoma, Washington. Greg is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Peter Serko, where are you?
I'm in Tuscany, outside a little town called Pietro. I always get it's my name. Like must be Peterstown or something like that. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I want to say what the reason you're here is because you posted on Facebook that you wrote a book, and I read this book, liked it a lot, and ended up chatting with you and said let's come on the podcast and talk about your book. And
Yeah.
by being I need to give a little bit of background about you, Peter, and how I know about you. My wife was a special education director on Vashon, and for years you were her IT director. You did all the technology for the school district, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I sent a few emails when her laptop wouldn't work. But one night she hauled me off to a one-man show. She said, we've got to go see this play that Peter has written. And we went to a local theater and watched you perform a one-man play. The fact of you're often described as a Renaissance man when Paula mentions you to other people, and so we've got a playwright, we have an author, we have a polymath, an IT director, and you started as when you were 50 or so. You said let's start doing photography, and you became not just a good photographer but a professional photographer. Am I exaggerating at all?
Wow, that really sounds great. No, no, you're not exaggerating. It was almost 10 years ago now that I did that play. It's hard to believe that much time has passed. Yeah. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Tell me,
I think you got it right.
yeah, tell me about why you came up with the idea for this book. So you're from New York, right? And
Right. I'm from upstate New York. Yeah.
so grew up around. This is a book about a young girl in the Civil War,
Right.
and her memories. Tell me, where'd you come up with this idea for this book?
Well, it started probably about 10 or 12 years ago. I was home visiting my parents. My parents live in the Binghamton area, which is in they call it the southern tier of New York State. And in the room where I typically would stay when I went home, there was this old tattered cardboard storage box in there. And inside this box was a bunch of books, small books of varying sizes. And the books turned out to be my great grandmother's diaries. Her name was Maud Murphy Phelps, and she died when I was a sophomore in college, so I actually knew her quite well. And she and her husband Earl were grape farmers, but they raised other kinds of fruit in the Finger Lakes region. The Finger Lakes region is just west of where I grew up. The really very beautiful beautiful area, lots of agricultural and recreation. Now, Watkins Glen, Cornell, Ithaca, those are cities on the lake. And I just became real interested after reading her diaries about that side of my family. That's my mother's side of the family. And but even before that, when I was in high school, when I was a sophomore in high school, we went to Gettysburg, and on the way to Gettysburg, my mother mentioned that we had a family member named Powell who fought and died at Gettysburg, but that's all she knew. She didn't know like who he was or anything like that. And so after I got these diaries, I started looking into my ancestry, doing a little genealogy research, and it's so much easier nowadays with the ancestry.com. That's what I used. And in pretty short order, I discovered who this Howell person was, and his name was Hannibal Howell, and he was my great 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 grandfather. So that's just in the genealogy terms, that's called third great grandfather. And he died at the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863, in about the first 20 minutes of the battle. He was in the New York 76th Regiment, and he volunteered along with two of his brothers in 1861, and only one brother survived. And that brother's name was Byron. The other brother that died was his name was Tappan, and Hannibal was the oldest in the family. It came from a family of 13 kids, and Hannibal was the oldest one. So anyway, I just was very fascinated by this story of these three brothers. Like, well, why did they do this? Why did they volunteer? They volunteered to join, and so I just started reading more about the Civil War and thinking, hey, I really would like to write something about this, but I have no idea which way to do it. And probably 60,000 books have been written on the Civil War. The Civil War is the most written about event in human history, far eclipsing anything else. I mean, it's still being written about. Books are coming out every day, from academic stuff to things like my book. And so I could never figure out, like, well, what angle would I tell the story from? And then probably about 3 years ago, I was looking back over kind of my resources, and I saw that Hannibal and Charlotte was his wife. They had 5 children, by the way. When he enlisted, he had 4 children with one on the way. And the 5th child, Harriet, known as Hattie, was born after her father left. So she never knew her father. That's how I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story through Hattie's voice of the
So,
daughter who never knew her father.
so,
She was about 1.5 when he died.
so Peter, you were visiting your parents. You found this tattered old box with, various letters, archives, things was that set
Yeah.
aside for
Mhm.
you? Was it
Yes, my mother had gotten them from her cousin Donna, with me in mind. My mother, I'm kind of known in my family as the person who collects photographs and so on. And so, yeah, my mother got those with me in mind. And the diaries that had very little personal information in them. It's all about what she did day to day. And one of the very interesting ones that I think you'll both appreciate is in 1960, with the election of JFK and Nixon. She was a poll worker in her little town, and I guess there was some dispute about the counting of votes. First of all, so she notes that they stayed late because they couldn't figure out. But in her diary entry the next day, she's lamenting the fact that JFK has won, and she's concerned about the country because there's a Catholic president. There's going to be a Catholic president. It's very sweet. But meanwhile, she had these scrapbooks. So also in this box were these scrapbooks where she cut things out of newspapers, and she had tons of pictures of the Kennedys. She was totally enamored eventually with the Kennedys, but it was very sweet, to see this. She was very worried because they were Methodists, and so she was very worried that a Catholic was going to be in the White
Oh
House.
God. Well, I went back to Valley Forge for the Boy Scout Jamboree in 1964. I must have been 7th grade or so. And there, the vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, delivered the speech to all the all the Boy Scouts, and we did Gettysburg and went through all of that. Why did you? Where did this idea of then writing a book? You're not an author. You just said, I'm going to I'm going to write a book. Where did this come from, or is this just part of your MO as being a Renaissance man? You just sort of
Uh,
quote from this and that, and
first of all, I should say that um, I've discovered about myself that I have about a 10-year attention span. So I can do something really intensely for about 10 years and then I got to move on to something else. So the writing is the thing that I've moved on to. That's just the way I operate. For example, we talked about earlier that my work for the school district being an IT guy, when I just happened to be on the staff, I was a counselor at the time when the internet came to the district, and I got drafted just because I knew a little bit more than everybody else, which wasn't a lot. And I just basically had to figure that job out on my own. So it actually fit real well with my way of operating. I'm not much of a planner. I just jump into something and do it. Fortunately, with the book, it appears to have turned out to be, an okay book. It's a readable book, and it tells an interesting story, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell a story for young kids to know something about the war. Although I didn't know I was writing for the younger audience, I just was writing. So,
Greg, any thoughts about
Yeah,
Hattie and this process?
I'm not much for narrative writing. I'm not much for novels. I read very little. I used to. Years ago, I was very much interested in fiction, but I still love historical fiction. And we had a guest on who did a fictional picture of the Paris Commune, and like you, he really had a fascination with the politics and the history of the Paris Commune, but he fictionalized around it. And I've always been curious, when you write that way, do you decide in advance how much you want to fictionalize and how much you want to, really emphasize the history, what actually happened? I mean, how do you balance those things, and how's that play?
yeah. Well, for me, it was, there were many, many holes in the story. I actually have very little information about any of those people. Hannibal, Byron. I actually have quite a bit of information about Byron, which I'll tell you about in a bit. Um, but I didn't know much, so I had to like pretty much make it up. So where I stuck to the facts was I was able to get a history of the New York 76 Regiment, which is the regiment they served in, that was written by somebody shortly after the war. And so that helped me to know where they were when and what they were doing. And so I was able to use that to say, I know what they're doing. And so I just kind of throw them into the story. And so most of the letters that you read, written from her uncle, Byron, telling about the war, are a lot of those are from firsthand accounts that I've read in various publications. About there's one story, one letter about it, where he tells of being at night and they had to sleep on the battlefield and they're pulling bodies to hide behind bodies so they don't get shot, in the middle of the night. Well, that didn't really happen to them, but that's a true story from somebody that served in the war. So I read firsthand accounts, and there are a lot of firsthand accounts from the Civil War. It's just an unbelievable, because people wrote letters. That was the other thing. Writing was very, big during that time, and writing letters back and forth. The army realized that to keep troop morale up, they had to support that. So they had postal details that followed the troops around, and so letter writing was a big deal during the war. So there's a lot of correspondence, and I even have letters from Hannibal Hall, which I'll tell you about at some point.
So I have a confession to make. I, immediately got the book and started to read it, and I was about a third of the way through it. I mean, I enjoyed the book, but then I'd hear this, well, and then they had muskets, and the muskets were, this is what a musket was, and it's kind of, I'm going, well, he doesn't need to go, and I know what a musket is. He doesn't need to explain it or whatever. And then I stopped and I went online and read the reviews on Amazon and realized this. I was a third of the way through the book before I realized this was a young adult's book. You're writing this for a middle school, I don't know, what would you say, 10 to 14-year-old, that range,
Right.
and that's why at times the descriptions would stop and you would elaborate a little bit to give people some context so they could follow this. Why did you choose this young adult fiction genre? I mean, do you have grandkids that you're trying to
Well,
send a
my grandkids are all young, below 5. I didn't know I was writing. I thought I was writing for young adults. That's what I thought I was writing. And my first editor, after she read it, she said, "Well, you're actually writing for a middle grade audience, which is even a little bit younger." Um, so I just had really didn't quite understand my audience exactly, but I knew that I would have to explain things, and so that's kind of why I had to do it that way. Uh, it was interesting. I was just home about a month ago. My parents are still alive; they're in their early 90s, and I was one of my friends has read the book back there, and I found out that he's a gun collector, and he has rifles, muskets, and rifles from the Civil War. And so I was down in his basement, and I have some videos, I haven't posted them yet, but I was actually holding, real Civil War muskets, in my hands, with the bayonet on the end. And wow, it was really something to, I mean, they're beautiful weapons. They're all like handmade. But wow. Yeah, yeah, there they are. Yes. Yeah. So I was holding those. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So I put this nonfiction section in the back because I wanted to be able to explain things, that you read during the, in the book.
right, right. A lot of sensibilities of a young woman too, and a powerful young woman that's focused and driven and good ethics and loves her family, and you know that was good too. And the person on the cover is your great grandmother, right?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
that's not. Okay, good. That's a good question.
I
That
thought that,
photograph.
oh, you found this in the shoebox, and no.
No, there is a pictures of her in the back. There are real pictures of her, but the only pictures I had of her, there's a like a studio photograph of her and her husband Earl, and their son, or her and her husband Arthur, excuse me, and their son Earl. Um, but I had no good pictures of her that I thought would be for a cover. And so that photograph was in my great grandmother's, one of the, her, in the box. That was in the box. And about 3 months ago, I figured out who that was. I knew a name, but I didn't know kind of what a relationship. So that's Hattie's husband, Arthur's sister's daughter. And her name is Minnie Lawton. And it's such a beautiful photograph. It's, probably from about 1890. And I mean, it's just absolutely perfect. And it's a beautiful picture of her. And so I use that for the cover. And when I talk about the dress in the story, I'm modeling that dress after the one that she's actually wearing, with a watch on her shoulder and so on. So yeah, that's where
Yeah,
I got that from.
this is your
That's her.
scrapbook. That's your scrapbook here, and I'll make a bigger picture for you. So that's Hattie.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
When
Yeah. That's it. That's the real Hattie.
when I was I my family didn't have any real written records. I mean, they were on my mother's side were Italian peasants, I guess. They were very poor, so there was very little I could find written about them to capture the flavor that you've captured. And but what I did do when I was, I don't know, 12, I had a Wollensack tape recorder that was given to me by, I think, my sister. And I just sat down with my grandmother and let her talk. And I made
Oh,
three
wow.
reels, 4 reels of that, broken Italian, broken English, and broken Italian and broken English. And but there were things that surprised me. And when you let someone talk, or when you discover uh, things from your family heritage, there are things that surprise you. What did you find when you opened that up that might have surprised you? Was there anything that you deleted? I mean, that you found there that you didn't want the world to know, or
Uh,
that must have been really
uh,
quite a process.
no, well, other than what I did realize was just how hard a life that being a farmer. I mean, they were a farming family, and so, like I said, her diaries are talking about her day-to-day life. So every entry starts off pretty much with what the weather is, an important thing to a farmer. And she talks about what she did. She swept the house, she baked this, she did this, she did this. Well, if she swept the house, she swept it with a broom. If she baked it, she's baking in a wood-fired oven. She's feeding some of the people that work with them and so on. So I realized what a difficult life that was. And, then also again, I knew her. I mean, she was my, great grandmother. I was over to her, been to her house, stood in the kitchen with her, ate her food. So I just realized how difficult a life they were, and they were very religious. Went to church, and when my mother, I do know this, when my mother started dating my dad is a Slovak background. My dad's family's from the Carpathian Mountains, and um, uh, they they were not into the fact that my mother was dating, to her, like he was, he could have been, a African American. I mean, that's how they viewed, my dad. And of course, my dad won them over, and everybody was happy after. But it was a pretty shocking. They were a very white family, and one of the things I learned, interestingly enough, and I only just discovered this recently, my 11th great grandfather, I have two 11 great grandpas, so that's 11 great great greats, were on the Mayflower. So
Jesus.
that's how long that side of my family has been in this country. So if your family's been in this country a long time, there are a lot of evidence of it. So that's what's kind of fun. Whereas my dad's family, they're, two generations back, they're in the old country, and that's really hard to find. Yeah, like
Tell
your
us
family
about
in Italy.
Yeah,
Yes.
tell us about all of the nationalities in your hometown, Greg.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, really in the middle of the soy and cornfields. But what's interesting is that they found bituminous coal 100 or so years ago beneath these flatlands, cornfields. And so that became an industrial oasis, really, in the Midwest. And what does an industrial area attract but immigrants? So turn of the century,
Sure.
Italians, Lithuanians, mainly Italians and Lithuanians. Though of course, Poles and others came, but Lithuanians often settled in Chicago, and so they would sort of melt down into central Illinois where these coal mines were. And Italian Americans were mainly Northern Italians. In fact, my family's from much more north than where you are in Tuscany. They're from
Right.
Venezia and the Dolomites and the Dolomite Mountains, which very different. But yeah. I mean, industry attracts Eastern and Southern Italia, Southern Europeans, and
Yeah.
Sure.
your father was Eastern European.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. My grandfather came over when he was 8 years old, and another thing I found out during this thing is my name is not spelled Serko. My name really is spelled Zirko. And
Yeah.
so that, there's always revelations when you start to kind of really take a look at things. It was probably, a clerk at Ellis Island just said, oh, Serko, and it
Yeah.
sticks.
yeah, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
way
and you
that
don't
goes.
recover that. You're lucky you recovered it because in my family, we're kind of stuck with the Ellis Island name. It certainly wasn't the name of the Lithuanian side. It wasn't the name that they were given. It wasn't the Italian side, however.
Good. Well, I will link to this. I'd recommend people, adults, young people, give this a gift to your kids, and this is good, Peter. How are the book sales?
Pretty good. The only place you can really get it now is on Amazon. Well, you can get it on Barnes and Noble too, but um, Yeah, it's going okay. I
Yeah.
think I've sold a couple hundred books, which is okay. It's not a money making proposition for sure. But that's not why I did it. I don't, I'm almost 70, so I'm in a position where I don't have to be making money from my writing. I can just, do what I want to do. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Let's change the subject. Like I said, I first met you when you were doing a play about your brother David.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was dragged to it. I wasn't really, I thought, oh God, here we go. And I think I even brought my son who was in college. And we were by the Grand Theater in a small theater, and you went out and did a one-man show. I was absolutely blown away how powerful an evening that was. And I love the idea of being a grouchy grump going to the play, and at the end of it just spending hours talking about the play and all aspects of it. Tell me about David. Tell me about your decision to become a playwright and actor.
Uh, well, first of all, my brother David was 6 years younger than me. So when I left home to go to college, he was 12 years old. He was in sixth grade. And, like we all know, once you kind of go to college, you're pretty much, gone. So that's kind of what happened with me. And I moved far away, on the West Coast. My brother ended up settling eventually in New York City, of course. He was a super talented actor, dancer. I mean, he could do it all. And he died in 1992 from the complications of AIDS. And we became very close. I was very close to him, even though we spent most of our years living apart. He was the best man at our wedding. And um, when he became ill, he called me in March of 1988 and told me on the phone that he was HIV positive. And, I knew, you know, I knew what that meant. It wasn't like I didn't, think, oh, everything's going to be fine. He'll get out. I knew that it was just going to be a matter of time. And so we became very close. We spent a lot of time together, as much as we could. We lived on different coasts. And I was fortunate to be with him in his final 3 weeks. He died in Lenox Hill Hospital. And it was such a powerful experience for me that that I knew that I was going to tell the story someday. I just had no idea how I was going to do it or when I was going to do it. I just knew that I was going to tell. It was just such a powerful experience. And so it took me 20 years. So basically, in 2013, as we were coming towards the 20th anniversary of his death, or 2012, when it was coming to the anniversary of his death, I said, if I'm going to do something, I got to do it right now. And that's, kind of how it got started. And I just started, writing. And finally, I realized, oh, I'm going to have to get up on stage and do this. I'm not going to write a book, although I may write a book now about it. Um, so I just decided I'm going to go on stage and do it. What I want, my goal was to bring the show home and perform it in my hometown in a theater where he performed when he was in high school. That was my goal. And so the show that you saw at the Dukes Bay Theater in Tacoma was just kind of a warm up for that. That was the first time I'd ever been on stage. I don't know if you were there for the first show or the second show. I did two shows.
First show.
Yeah, first show. So, yeah, I had never done anything like that before, and so it's what I had to do.
Yeah.
And um, that's the only. It's like writing the book. I had to write it. I had to do the show. I had to. So I became super focused on that. I'll tell you that.
And
It took about everything I had.
the name of the show is My Brother Kissed Mark Zuckerberg. Tell me about that title.
Uh, uh, I just kind of came up with it, although I sort of had a kind of a quasi dream that my brother did kiss him, but of course he couldn't have because Mark Zuckerberg's much younger than my brother would have been. I could just kind of like that. My original idea was for a title was, I actually did a podcast first, a couple podcast episodes, and I called it My Brother is Dead and Other Funny Stories. That was going to be the original title, and then I changed it to My Brother Mark Zuckerberg. But partly because one of the things I did, I called it the David Serko Project. It's all part of a bigger thing where I wanted to find out about my brother's life. I had missed so much. I'd never saw my brother perform. My brother played on stages all over the world, toured internationally. Um, I just, there's a lot I didn't know. So I used Facebook to find friends of his. So I met all these people who knew my brother and told all these stories. And lo and behold, people felt the same way about my brother as I felt. He was a very charismatic fellow, um, very generous, very, very funny. And so, and I'm still friends with these people. People still talk about my brother. I still hear from people have found out about this, and they've sent me stuff. So people sent me videos. One of his friends he used to live with, they used to make in the old days answering machines where you could record a message. Hello, this is Peter Serko. I'm not here. Well, he and his roommate used to make funny little skits. They do little skits. So I had this skit I played in the show. So I learned an unbelievable amount about my brother's life that I had missed. So that was, uh, it was a way to heal myself. That's what the show is about. It was about grief and healing. That's really what it's about. And interestingly enough, Hattie'swar is about the same thing. And I only realized that recently.
I said it's apparently a theme to discover. I mean, you really have a passion to discover things about people that you're close to or could be close to, and
Yeah.
I guess someday somebody will have to do that for you.
Peter, I will link to your Venmo video that's on your webpage, which is the best 38 minutes anybody can spend watching a video. That was a remarkable story that you put together about the play and how you ended up in New York and how you discovered all of his friends. And I don't think that we can underestimate how horrible, absolutely horrible, the Reagan administration was during this time. I was going back and looking at a couple of old videos of the press conference back in 1982 when there were just 800 people who had died. And the press secretary was making gay jokes and people were laughing,
Right.
and they were, I'm not gay, are you? Should we cut down on cruising? Well, I don't cruise. Do you cruise? Ha, 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 ha. And the press, it's a Saturday Night Live skit of how to be inappropriate. And it was horrible.
It's pretty horrifying. Well, one of the things that I did starting about 5 years ago, I wanted to kind of revive this. My idea was to tell the story. Part of the function of the play was to tell the story of AIDS during that time. Because if you were born after us, you might not know anything about it. And so I started going to the high school and did stuff in the schools, and we did some collaboration with some artists. And because my brother was an activist, he was a member of ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And so, I've been in touch with a number of I've become actually very close friends with several of my brother's friends who were activists. And so I just learned a great deal about the important role activism played during that era in really bringing about the changes that have helped to save millions of lives worldwide. I mean, AIDS is not gone. I mean, we don't hear about it, but I think probably 38 million people have died of HIV and AIDS, and an equal number across the globe are infected. So it's still very real. So.
Yeah, and
and thank you for mentioning the film too, because that's another example of something else. Like I did that the day after I retired in 2016. I started working on that film. That's what I did. That's what I did for the first 6 months or 4 months of my retirement. Work on that film. I'd never made a film either. never done that either. So
It's funny you
so that
said
was kind of
I
fun.
taught myself Adobe Premiere, and I went and started to work on it. And yeah, there's just great parts in that film where you discover that your brother was gay from somebody at the co-op.
In Tacoma. In
It, it,
Tacoma. Yeah. Yeah.
tell that story. That's your
Yeah. Yeah. So my wife and I were married in '79, and we moved to Tacoma so she could go to law school. And I was working I was volunteering at the food co-op, which was down in the what's the Sixth Avenue district down there, down there. And I was just kind of the story I tell is I was cleaning out a bucket of peanut butter, and I kind of choked on was tasting the peanut butter at the bottom. And this young woman and I came over to me, and we just kind of started chit chat, where you're from, blah, blah, blah. She said, "Oh, I'm from," I told her where I was from, and she said, "Oh, I went to college in that town. My twin brother still goes to college there." I said, "Oh, well, my brother goes there." And she said, "Well, my brother's a theater major." And I said, "Well, my brother's a theater major." And then first thing you know, it turns out her brother Jim was a lover of, been to my house. Was my brother's first, or uh, David was Jim's first kind of gay lover experience. So so that's how I really found out my brother was gay. She outed him, and Jim, this guy, came to the show at the Cidermill. So I met him face to face. He came to the show, and yeah, so yeah, that's how I found out.
and you tell
So
your you tell your
yeah,
wife Susan, I just discovered my brother is gay, and she looked at you and said, "Well, of course he is. Everybody knows. Everybody
yeah,
knows
no, it
that."
was, yeah, well, I also wanted to start the show because I know, somebody coming to a show about AIDS, people like, well, what is this going to be like? And so I start the show off with this story to get people, one, relaxed and laughing because it's a funny story. Although it's interesting, I've done it in a number of different venues, and in some audiences, you know, they laugh, but they don't quite get it. And other audiences really laugh, but I did it at the high school theater, and it was about 300 people. And you can see me in the video I have of it. I'm shocked by the reaction. There's so much laughter that it kind of like blows me back a little bit. I'm thinking, because I've only done it in that little 40 theater. People are laughing and chuckling, but when you get 300 people laughing all at once, it's a very interesting experience, to be in that kind of situation. Yeah.
the way in which it's a combination of storytelling, video, slideshow, it's just this, and then just one person telling this story, this just loving story. It was just so powerful. You should be proud of
Well,
yourself about that.
thank you. Well, again, just to show you how clueless I am about myself sometimes, is the next day, my wife Sue said to me, she said, you really revealed a lot about yourself, because she had not seen, she had no idea what this was going to be like. So she saw it the first time, just like you did. And she said, you really revealed a lot about yourself in the show. And I thought, I did. I had no idea really what I had done until, after thinking about it, and I thought, of course I did. And it's talking about myself the whole time, my journey, with my brother.
Let me change the subject. You live in both Tacoma area, I don't know, probably Vashon, and you have a home over in the Medal Valley, over where my sister lives in Twist, Winthrop, and
Oh, she does. Okay.
she lives in Twist. Her family lives over there. She's been there, just absolutely loves it. She's a horse nut, and every time I come to visit her, it reminds me a little bit of when I was a hippie hitchhiking across the country. I ended up in Jackson Hole, and it was a little hippie place. People are making belts and selling, it was a funky little place. And when you go to Jackson Hole now, you hear private jets flying in and out, in and out, in and out. And
Oh, right,
that
right.
is the same thing that happened with we did a podcast called Dividing Paradise with a sociologist from, I think it was Wazoo, who studies what happens when poor rural parts of the country end up having all of this affluence come in. And it's happened in Montana, and it's happened in Idaho, and it's happened in Boise, and it's happening in Winthrop. And it's in one sense it's great because you get a lot of money coming in, and you get a lot of wealth coming in. But in the other sense, it's hard for people that are there that continually getting displaced with the cost of housing and so forth.
Sure, sure.
You go to Vail. I went to a wedding in Vail and was chatting with all of the people that are living in Vail that are working there. Not one of them lives in Vail. They have to take an hour to an hour and a half bus ride to their apartments because it's too expensive there. I don't know. What's your thought about this dilemma of these just beautiful parts of the country that get this imbalance, if you will, an imbalance of uh, poverty and wealth, and everybody loves the country and they love where they're at, but it seems to throw things off kilter a little bit. What's your thought about that?
Well, it's interesting because so I'm part of that. I'm part of those people that move someplace and
Right,
do something.
right,
Um, but what I'm also aware of, particularly in Winthrop and somewhat true on Vashon too, is that the people that have moved, like we call ourselves in Winthrop 206ers.
right,
We're coming over from 206 area code. Uh, Generally speaking, broad generally, all the social services, the arts, um, that are happening in that community and Vashon too, are the result of people from the outside,
right.
doing that. And so
Great.
people are trying to address these issues. And there's a really, there's a big housing coalition on Vashon. Similarly, in Winthrop, that's happening too, of building affordable housing for teachers and so on. So I mean, that's just a hard one. I don't know what the answer is, my observation is that there's also a lot of services that have come along that are instituted by the people from the outside, that they have money, they're willing to put their money back, their time, and Okanagan County, where Winthrop is like one of the poorest counties in the state. Um, so my wife volunteers at the food bank when we're over there, and I mean, it's a difficult one. I don't know how you stop it from happening.
Right.
Certainly the people benefit. Selling their properties. They're selling their 20 acres to people like me, and they're making quite a bit of money from it. But what do they do? Where do they live, or where do the people live that work at the bakery or work at the post office and so on. So no, I don't know, but I just know that it also has brought a degree of enhancement to the communities as well. So it's not necessarily a liability always, but people are being generous, and um, so that's about
Yeah,
all I could say about.
yeah, yeah. You're a photographer, and you're not just a guy that takes pictures and posts it on Instagram. I mean, you've had professional shows at the art museum. And
Yeah.
how did you get an interest in photography, or where did this come from?
Well, I've always really been interested in photography. I was just always fascinated. I love old photographs and so on. And all of that happened after I turned 50. In fact, that I don't know if you really remember the show opens, the one man show opens, but it's a voiceover, and I tell the story about turning 50 and how traumatic turning 50 was, because I had the sense that more time had passed behind me than I had left ahead of me. and that if I hadn't done all these little things I thought I wanted to do, if I hadn't done them by 50, I wasn't going to do them. But of course, everything I've done has happened after I turned 50. So it's what happened at that particular junction of my life? We sold our house on Vashon at the time and moved to Tacoma, to a condo in Tacoma. You and Paula were living around the corner down in that condo. What was that called?
We were in the Perkins.
The Perkins building. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So you guys were there. So we were down at the Thea's Landing, right next to the Glass Museum. And my wife Sue, who's I always like to say saw the artist in me before I saw it in myself, gave me a gift of a workshop with a photographer in Oregon, and I went down there and I spent a week with him. He told me at the end of the workshop, he said, "Make the Museum of Glass your Yosemite." We're talking in reference to Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams, lived in Yosemite. That's partly why he was able to catch all these iconic. When you live there, you see it in all times. Well, I live next to the Museum of Glass, and I live downtown, and so I thought, I'm just, I had nothing else to do. I didn't have a house anymore. I didn't have a yard to mow, lawn to mow. I didn't have blackberries and so I just started taking photographs and of the city. I was totally every day I'd go out and walk around town and then I amassed this large, these iconic kind of photographs of the museum in all sorts of situations. And I just asked them, "Hey, I've got all these photographs. Would you be interested in having a show there?" And so one thing, happened. It just happened. So interesting. One of the things I've learned is I'm not really great at asking. I'm not really an extroverted kind of guy, but if you ask for things and you're ready with the goods, people will respond to that. And so I asked at the museum, "Hey, would you be interested in showing this work?" And one thing led to another. So I'm willing to take some risks. That was a pretty risky thing to do, but it all kind of worked out. And I rarely take photographs anymore. Like I said, I've kind of moved on. I just don't have that kind of. I'm just interested. Like I have this 10-year attention span, and so maybe I'll return to it. And the only thing I do regularly with photography is I photograph. I used to photograph for Tacoma Opera, Vashon Opera. I like doing theatrical production photography. I really like doing that, and so I have thousands of production photos from opera and so on. So that's kind of what I do now.
Well, I'm glad that your ADHD went untreated, because it gives us so much good art, and we haven't even mentioned your baking and your your other. Yeah, we could just keep going and going and going. Anyway, Peter, you're such an interesting fellow. I want people to check out your book. I definitely want them to check out the Peter Serko project, and maybe I can even find a few links to your photography. I lived at the same time in Tacoma and would go around taking pictures. And when I look at your pictures of the same things I was seeing and my pictures, you realize that I'm not that good. And you are, which is that's just like going into a restaurant and getting a great dinner. You realize that sometimes chefs can just make better dinners. You think you're a good cook? No, you're not. Go to that place and you'll see you aren't.
So. Well, thank you for that. But one of the things I realized during the writing my show was, once again, my brother's impact, the death of my brother's impact on me. And if I had mentioned it, my brother's last words to me before he died was, "Listen to your heart." And I knew what he meant by that, but I had no idea how to live that. And it took me 20 years to kind of figure that out and to kind of come to grips with it. But one of the things I realized one day, I was sitting in my house looking at a group of my photographs on the wall, is that I saw my brother in those photographs, and when I tell this little story from the show, it's I don't see his like I don't see him, I don't see his image, but I see the impact of his death on me, and that I see it in those photographs. And so, and Ansel Adams talks about that. Ansel Adams had quoted as saying, "There's two people in every photograph: the photographer and the person viewing it." And so, you know, when you look at one of my photographs, you're seeing what I see, but you're also putting yourself into that. And so, the skill of a photographer is your ability also to help the viewer see what you want them to see. And that's what Ansel Adams was good. He was really good at helping you put yourself into that photograph. And so, I really credit everything I've done. I give all credit to my brother just to give me that little bit of a push. And you know, again, it was a horrible, tragic, terrible thing that happened to my family. I wish my brother was still here with us, but it was such a blessing for me, really, as a artist. You know, I mean, you know, it totally changed my life, finally, for the good. And uh, so thank you for
Yeah.
letting me talk about it, and thank you for recognizing, you know, the deeper story in the play,
Right.
and the book too. Yeah.
Greg, you had an impact of your sister too, didn't she? She got you into college. She was how much older was your sister than you, Greg?
I was born in 33. I was born in 47. I guess that's what, 14 years.
Well, that's a big
Wow.
gap.
But I was lazy and I had no ambition. High school, nobody was very successful from my high school. And she wrote all the applications for college and trying to get money because we didn't have enough money to send me to college. And I'm appreciative of that. I mean, that's why she's with me now. I mean, I appreciate what she did. You know, when you don't have any ambition, it's always great to have people that push you. And I think that's the story of my life, is finding people that didn't find them. They found me, but they pushed me.
Right.
So when I hear people talk about how they're self-made, I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I think everybody owes a great debt to other people. You owe it to your brother. I owe it to my sister and many, many other people.
Right. Right. This has been fun, Peter. You know, when you come across the ferry and come to Ruston, there's a brand new bakery that opened up in that building right before, on the other side of the street of Antique, and it opened yesterday. We went down and
Oh,
got
really?
it. Is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. It's the
Do they make
woman
breads or is it pastries?
make breads, it's gluten free, and which kind of freaked me out a little bit, but it's just that it is great. It's the same woman that did the Rin, that did all the interior design as a hobby. She's a pastry chef, and she's good, and it's gonna be 10 pounds in my life added because of that
Yeah,
place. It's
that's way
within
too
walking distance.
close.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
yeah, way too close. Yeah, that's dangerous. Yeah.
So when you
Well, you
get
know,
across,
I should tell you, I don't live on Vashon anymore. We sold our house and we moved to Seattle. We have an apartment on Lower Queen Anne. Yeah.
no kidding.
Yeah.
My sister lives there in the old high school in Queen Anne on the hill there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Gosh. Well, we need to get together one of these times, particularly like if you come out to Twist and see your sister. Well, let's stay in touch with that.
I
I'd really like to
definitely
see you guys.
I will not come to Twist without visiting you. And if we find myself up by Queen Anne, we'll text you and give you a call too and see what's what. I'd love to see you in Sioux. So thank
That'd be
you.
great. I like to see Paul. Good. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.